Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at the close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men, near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. So that is possibly the best known Villanelle by Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night. Now, Villanelle is the style I wanted to talk about today. It is another really interesting style where the repeated lines are the key focus to the Villanelle. It's a bit more complicated than something like the sestina or even like a sonnet where like there are a certain number of rules and you just follow those. The Villanelle kind of has a few intermixed things that Dylan Thomas does very well that is very hard. Not only is there a rhyme scheme, and it's an ABA rhyme scheme all the way. So the first and third line will rhyme with every other first and third line. And the second line will rhyme with every other second line in these nice tercets. It's 6 stanza poem. 5 of the stanzas are 3 lines each, and the last one is 4 lines. In the first stanza, you get the first and second repeated lines, and they'll be on the first and third line. The second line of every single one, though it rhymes with each other second line, is kind of the free form one. That one is okay to write whatever, but the first and the third line of the first stanza will then repeat alternately at the end of every other stanza, and both of them will appear in that same order at the very end of the poem. So in this case, do not go gentle into that good night, and rage, rage against the dying of the light will then appear alternately all the way down. So they'll both appear twice more in the body of the poem, and then at the conclusion again, in that order, they will both be there. Villanelle can be really, really tricky. I find it a little bit hard just because you're very limited in the words you can use because you need to have that rhyme scheme on the end. And apparently that wasn't always the case. Apparently this started as like a dance song style, which is probably why that there are refrains, because anything that is a song is going to have a kind of a refrain or a chorus. This is a style that really didn't have rules for a long time. This is a style that was just following this kind of folk song style. From what I understand, French poets picked it up from like Spanish and Latin folk songs, and we're doing it kind of in a similar vein. And so we're crossing multiple languages, but they're all Latin based, so it's okay. But it seems like it was much more recently that the really like fixed style of the Villanelle came into play. Obviously, Dylan Thomas took it pretty seriously. Like he really stuck to the rhyme scheme like to the T. But I think if you were to fudge it a little bit, it probably wouldn't ruin the form just because of how Villanelles are. The main key is having those repeated lines and not making it sound like annoying, not making it sound like it's being overused. You need to have a line like with his that sounds more like you're pleading with someone or something that you're creating some kind of a tension with it, that those lines don't get overdone. They work so well with the poem and they sound so good on their own that it's a natural sounding repetition. I think that's the real trick with the Villanelle, is that you need to come up with a way to make it sound like you're not just repeating the same thing over and over, that you're telling some kind of a story. And I think it works really well for kind of a little bit more aggressive. Like he's really like burn and rave at the close of day, like rage, rage against the dying of the light, like really pleading. And I believe this poem was pleading with his father to not just give up and let himself die. But if we're looking at the Villanelle as a fixed form, which we are for this video, even though it didn't come from a fixed form. It is much more recent development that it became a fixed form. We're looking at a 19-line poem and 5 tercets followed by a quatrain with the refrains, the repeated lines, alternately repeating back again. This is one of those poems that is a little bit difficult to wrap your head around until you're looking directly at it. So I am going to post the text for Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. When you start to try and write it, the biggest challenge is that whatever you do with the first stanza then becomes inescapable. You're now stuck with those lines and they must repeat over again because that is how the form works. So if you think about it more like a song, like what do you want the song to be saying? What would you want the chorus of your song to be? That'd be a really good way to approach a villanelle. And it's the type of form that you could almost start in the middle and work your way out. You could almost write the second and third stanza and then decide from that what you want the first stanza to be. To me, that wouldn't work as well. I'm not that good at going back like that, but that would be an option if you were interested in starting but were really struggling with getting the first and third line correct and in a way that works for you to carry on. Now, I've written one villanelle before. It's the only one that felt like it worked out to me. I struggled very hard with the rhyme scheme, as I always do. I don't know why I find rhyme hard. There are so many people that find rhyme very easy, and I'm not on that list. But I'm gonna read to you the villanelle that I wrote and then talk about it kind of based on that and what my decisions were with that. My villanelle is called Lonely Artists. Freedom to the mass of those who search in vain. A cold breath on the wind, a chance to change. Somewhere in the darkness there is rain. The cool light sifting through the window pane gives color to the marble floors that never age. Freedom to the mass of those who search in vain. A respite from the right, the painting's shame bleeds, is life, the controversial claim. Somewhere in the darkness there is rain. Fingers soft upon the page, harsh strokes to cool the evening's rage. Freedom to the mass of those who search in vain. All fears upon the floor, an easel breaks, falls softly under footsteps and refrains. Somewhere in the darkness there is rain. A crack, high note, the sad-eyed sage, the brush, the only weapon that's in range. Freedom to the mass of those who search in vain. Somewhere in the darkness there is rain. Now for me, I started with an image in my head and I wanted to create kind of a story from it. This is one of my most heavily revised poems ever, and I continued revising it for years until I felt comfortable with it as a villanelle, because the mix of creating, I actually, in this sense, I created the lines that repeat fairly quickly. Freedom to the mass of those who search in vain. That was the first part I thought up and the first part that I wanted to then form this image around. And then somewhere in the darkness there's rain, and I wanted that image of something happening outside, that you're in some kind of a room and there is something else going on that could be a little bit unsettling in a way. And so I had already fixed on those, but coming up with the parts in between and figuring out how to weave some kind of a story was really hard. And a lot of it was kind of chopping up the lines. So I have parts where it's like, the painting's shame bleeds, is life, the controversial claim. Like, it's not a complete sentence, it's kind of a little bit of a run-on sentence. I'm trying to punch in emphases in order to balance out the fact that these repeated lines are coming back around and we're trying to get a lot into a very small space. It's quite hard. It's something I would recommend challenging yourself to do, but I don't think that this is something that is a very good poem for like a casual exercise. This is one really that if you're trying to do something with a bit more punch and emphasis, if you're really like, you got Les Miserables in your head and you're thinking, I really want to do something that has almost that kind of a quality. I was probably watching Les Miserables when I was initially thinking of this, to be perfectly honest. But if you've got that kind of a, almost something you want to fight for, that kind of a thought going on, a villanelle is a really good form. It takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of really thinking about how those lines play together. It isn't one that I think is a fun exercise. It's one that I think really takes a lot of time but the reward for it is beautiful. Like, there's a reason Dylan Thomas has got one super famous poem and that it's a Villanelle. And it's because, one, he did it very well, and not a lot of people do because it's a difficult form. But also, when it is done right, it almost becomes like an earworm. Like, it sounds so good. And it's partly because it probably came from these folk songs, something that people sang often and danced to and had fun with. And I think you could easily do a Villanelle that is happy and has that brightness to it. I don't know any off the top of my head. I think you could easily lean into that really like happy folk song feel to it and get something really interesting out of it. But Villanelle are so hard. I worked on that one for years, and I still, like, there are parts where I'm like, I wonder if I could even like make this more, do more with it. The keys to keep in mind are, you really want to find words that you can rhyme easily, that there are lots and lots of rhymes too, so you're not going to end up struggling. Like, don't choose something super long for the end of the word. Choose something that there are just packed with vowels, packed with sounds that you hear commonly. I used like vein and rain, and then for my repeated word, things that rhymed with change, that like change, age. Strong A sound was what I was really going for. I was leaning in, so refrain, claim, anything with that hard, long A. And don't be afraid to just try it and have fun and see. Obviously, like, that's how you get good at things, is just practicing. But that is the Villanelle. I hope that was helpful. Definitely leave any specific questions down below and I'll try and answer them. This is a form that, while I've written it before and I've understood it, I find it a little bit difficult. And if you also find it a little bit difficult, that's fine. I would love to read your Villanelles below. Have you tried the style before? Definitely give it a try because it is interesting. It is very different. Please leave your poems and share with everyone, and I would love to see what you have written. And that's all from me. I hope you're having a great day. Thank you so much for your support and for being so lovely. And don't forget that you can always send me your poems to review and critique if you're at the $5 and above level. And thank you so much. Bye.